Good morning, folks. It's Sunday morning, and I'm here with Tommy, and we are going to do our Sunday morning message. We've had some sickness going through Cedar Creek, and we just thought that the better part of valor would be to keep everybody home today. So we're going to do this message, and so that you can watch it here at home. And we're in the middle of a series that we started last week. It's called Swimming in the Cultural Sea. And it's all about ideas. And the reason we're talking about this is ideas matter. What you believe matters because what you believe will direct the course of your life. What you believe is important, what you believe to be true, will dictate your actions. And what you do will be what you become. And so what we believe is very important because it sets the course of our life. And we talked about that last week. And really we talked about that all summer when we looked at these creeds, these beliefs. And so we're doing that again, and we're looking at specific things. But when you talk about what you believe, particularly about some of these specific topics that we've been getting into, sometimes there's all kinds of information, and we cannot really know what's true, what's not true. I don't have access to all the information. So sometimes the issue is really who you believe. And that changes the question a little bit, doesn't it? What you believe versus who you believe. Sometimes we just have to say, I'm going to believe you. I'm going to trust you. And we have options as to who we believe. And so who you believe matters as well. And it's important for us, I think, to remember that we can hear and we can believe God. When you think about the options of who to believe, one of the options is you can believe God. And I like these verses in Proverbs, especially the first part of Proverbs. It talks a lot about this. Who do we believe? And God is telling us, hey, I can give you information. And here in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 10 says, "Hear, my son, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble." I like that God is saying, hey, listen to me so that your life will go well. And so God says, I'm going to tell you things, and we have the option to say, Lord, I'm going to believe you. So who we believe? Well, you can believe God. Or you can believe yourself. Sometimes I'm just going to believe this. This makes sense to me, or this feels good to me, and so I'm just going to believe it because it kind of fits with me. Well, that's dangerous. Here in Proverbs chapter 3, we're kind of specifically warned against that. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight." Again, we're talking about what we believe directing our paths. And it says there, hey, you can trust in your own understanding, but you might not want to, because we're limited. Instead, in all your ways acknowledge God. He will make your paths straight. So I can believe God. God says that'll be good. I can believe myself. Maybe not so good. We can believe the world. We can believe just kind of what the world around us believes. But here in Jeremiah, this is an interesting verse, Jeremiah 10, verse 2. It says, "Learn not the way of the nations, nor be dismayed at the signs of the heavens, because the nations are dismayed by them." In other words, God is telling us here, hey, look, the world around you is going to believe all kinds of things that you shouldn't believe. They're going to be dismayed at what they see, but you don't have to be, because God has something different for us. So this whole series, some of this, when we talk about these topics, we're saying, okay, we need to believe what's true, but some of it is just deciding, who am I going to believe? God, when you tell me something, am I going to trust you? Or am I going to trust myself, or am I going to trust what I hear somewhere else? I want to trust God. I want to trust Him because He makes promises to us. If you trust me, I'm going to read those verses in Proverbs 4. They're just so good. "Hear, my son, accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness, so that when you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble." There's promises there. If we take God's word, if we believe it. So that's what we're doing. So this series, again, we're looking at specific topics and asking some questions. What are the lies that we hear from the world? What are the truths that God tells us? And how do we respond to it? Now, just one more thing. The word lies, that's a loaded word, isn't it? And when I say, what are the lies that the world tells us, that seems harsh. And it's, well, come on. Just because you don't agree with it, does that mean a lie? Well, no, not always. But we have to remember, and we looked at this last week, there is an enemy. And the enemy is a liar. And there are lies out there. There really, truly, guys, is a battle between right and wrong, good and evil. That's not just a movie. It's not just a novel. It is absolutely true. In the world around us, there is a battle between good and evil, right and wrong. And you and I are living in the middle of it. We're living in the battlefield. And in many ways, that battle is being fought in our minds and in our hearts. Who are you going to believe? Who are you going to follow? And the enemy lies to us. He does. He tells us things that are not true so that we will turn our eyes from God. We'll turn away. So that's what we're doing. Look, this whole series, we're looking at specific topics. What are the lies the world tells us about those topics? What are the truths God tells us? And then what's our response? So today our topic that we're looking at is the environment. Okay? We're looking at the environment. And by environment, what I mean is the earth, the natural, physical world that you and I live in, the topography, the climate, the animals, and particularly when we talk about environment, we're talking about our interaction with it, our role, our living in it as humans. Because you and I live in this environment, and really environment means kind of this venue, this place, this space that we exist and that we interact in, what happens all around us. And so that's what I mean when I say environment. It's the earth that we live in, and particularly our place in that earth, all right? So that's what we're talking about. So here we go. What are the first thing we're going to look at is, what are the lies that our culture tells us when we think about the environment? Well, I can think of a couple big ones, I guess, a couple kind of big picture ones that maybe encapsulate what we want to think about here today. And here's the first one. The lie that our culture tells us is this, that we humans are no more than another animal. We're just no more than another animal. We just kind of are just the same as the squirrels and the bears and the mice and the flies and all that stuff. And really, when you think about that, what that gets to is an issue of priority, or maybe rights is the way to say it. And so one of the lies that the world tells us is, hey, we are no more important, we are no more prioritized than the squirrel in my backyard, or the trees that grow in my front yard. Our relative position is just the same as everyone else. We're just one more biological organism here in the environment. And so if that's true, then we have no more rights or privileges or responsibilities than any other animal. We're just functioning here like anyone else, like any other creature. That's the lie that I think our culture tells us. Now, here's why that's a lie. And it's in Genesis 1:26 and 27, and it tells us here who we are in relation to the rest of the world around us. And this is the account of when God created all of this. And it says this, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creature, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.' So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them." So the earth says we're just one more critter here. For us to say we are a priority over the horses is presumptuous, because we're not. We just are one more player. God says no, that's not true. God makes a distinction between humans and the rest of what he created. He says, and the distinction is this: humans were created in God's image. We're like God. in some way. We are not God, but we're like God in some way. And that's not true of everything else. The trees and the animals and the sky and the heavens and the moon and the stars and the water and all the other things in the world around us are not like God the way that we are. They show God's handiwork. They show God's creativity. They show God's power, the trees and the stars and the animals. But they're not like God the way that we are. And the way that we're like God is we are made in His image. And I don't think that necessarily means that we look like Him. I think it means that we feel and think like Him in ways that nothing else does. And it's kind of the difference between, if you came to my house, you would see in my house, there's a little environment there. And I got trees and grass, and I got apple trees in different places. I got cats and dogs. Oftentimes I have livestock out in the barn, cows and pigs. And in all of that, there are certain priorities. In other words, my kids have more priority and importance and right in the little environment of my house than my cats do. Why is that? Well, because they're my kids. They were born to me. They're my children. They're like me. We as humans, that's our place, and they're my heirs, and so my kids have a higher priority than my cats. It's not that I don't like the cats or the cats are bad or anything like that. It's just a relative priority. I will go out sometimes and I will cut down a tree in my yard. I don't do that with my kids. I don't just kind of dispose of them. Why is that? Is that I hate the trees? No, it's just that my kids are different. Does that make sense? That's what it's like. God, the world says we're just another animal. God says, no, you're different. You're like me so that you can have a relationship with me. And that's really what it is with me and my kids. I have a relationship with my kids that is higher and deeper and intimate in ways that I don't have. No matter how much I like my backyard, I don't have an intimate relationship with it like I do with my kids. That's why when the world says humans in this world, we're just like everything else, we're no more important than the trees, God says that's not true, because I made you like me so that you can have a relationship with me. So that's the first lie. We're no more than another animal. Here's another lie, and it's interesting because it's the exact polar opposite of what we just said, and that's this. We as humans reign supreme over the earth. We completely reign supreme over the earth. So it's the opposite of what we just said. Not that we're just like everything else. No, we have complete and total control, and we have the right to do whatever we want. We can do whatever we want because this is ours. Somehow we own this, and we have great impact and great power. We can create or destroy this environment. We have the power to make it good or to make it bad. And we have the right to make it good or bad because we reign supreme over the earth. That's the second lie. Here's why that's a lie, and it's really because God never gave us this earth. It's still His. It's still His possession. In Psalm 50, it says this, "For every beast of the forest is mine." This is God speaking. "The cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine." See, this is God's. God created it. Go back to the analogy of my house. That's my house, and it's not my kids' house. Someday they're going to inherit it from me. Someday I'm going to give it to them, but it's not theirs. And so when they lived in my house, they had special privilege. They had a place in that home different than anything else, but it wasn't theirs. They still were subject to me as dad, as the owner of the house. That's the way it is with our earth. So both of those things, we're no more than another animal, that's a lie. God says, no, that's not true. you're made like me, and you have a relationship with me that nothing else does. There is a priority. We don't like that word, but there is a priority on us, just like I prioritize my own kids over the trees in my backyard, the cats in my garage. The second lie is we reign supreme over the earth. We can do whatever we want. We have total control. We have the right and the power to completely manipulate the world as however we see fit. Well, that's a lie too, because God says it's mine. I created it. I have not given up control over it. So those are the lies that I think the world tells us when we think about the environment. So, what are the truths that God tells us? Well, here's the first one. And we're going to spend a lot of time in Genesis today because this is where it all began, where God created everything, and so that's where we see a lot of what we need to see and understand about the earth. And so the first truth that God tells us is this, that we are caretakers. We're caretakers of the earth. Right after those verses that I read earlier in Genesis 1, I'll read here in verse 28. So after God made people, men and women, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And then he says this, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Dominion, that's an interesting word. It's a word we don't use a whole lot. Or if we do, it has bad connotations to dominate something. We don't like that, and we think dominating is bad. Well, it can be. It can be if it's overbearing, if it's cruel, if it's selfish. But dominion just means rule over it. And God says something here. He says to us as humans, because you're different, because you're special, because you're in my image, and that makes us special. Don't make any bones about that. We are different. And with that comes some responsibility. God says, I want you to be the caretakers of this earth. In Psalm 8, an interesting verse. And this is a verse that is a prophecy of Jesus. We see it in the New Testament, but I think it's speaking to mankind, humans in general as well. And it's in Psalms 8, verses 3 through 8, it says, when I look at your heavens and the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands and have put all things under his feet. Again, we see this idea of dominion. Humans, we have a role of being caretakers of this earth. God says, I want you to rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and everything that moves along the ground. We have been given the responsibility to take care of this earth. Just like sometimes you would give your kids responsibilities to take care of their part of the house, perhaps. That's what we've been done. That's what God has done. He has given us the role of being caretakers of the earth. But here's the second truth, and these two truths have to go together. First one is that we're caretakers, but the second one is that the earth remains under God's control. And we looked at that a little bit earlier. Psalm 104 is a really fun psalm because it speaks to this topic. The whole thing is just filled with statements and observations about the natural world that we live in and what those observations do to the writer of that psalm. And so it's a really good psalm when you're thinking about this. And in Psalm 104, verses 31 and 32, it says this, may the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works, who looks at the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke. Remember we said that God still owns this earth. He didn't give up possession. Well, he also controls it. It's interesting there. It says God looks at the earth and it trembles. He touches the mountains and they smoke. the earth remains under God's control. He has not surrendered the ability and the right to influence it, to manipulate it. Why? Because it's His. It's still His. We're caretakers. We've been given responsibility in it, but overall ownership and overall responsibility remains with God. And there are things that only God can do in this earth. We're limited in our ability to influence this earth, but God isn't. I cannot look at a mountain and make it smoke. I cannot just he looks at the earth and it trembles. He touches the mountains and they smoke. I can't do that. I can't walk up to a hill and touch it and it begins to smoke. Nobody can. God can. God can just look at the earth and it shakes. And the truth about that is that God has not relinquished control and influence over this physical earth that we live in. It's His. He owns it. It's His. We're the caretakers, but the earth remains under His control. So, here's the third truth, and it's really a combination of those first two. If we're caretakers, but the earth remains under God's control, then here's the third truth. Our influence is real, but limited. The influence we have on this earth is real, but it's limited. I'm going to go back to Genesis in chapter 8. Chapter 8 is in the story of the great flood. And that's a powerful story talking about that second truth, how God still controls the world, and sin had increased on the world, and God said, I'm going to create a flood, and so He created a flood that covered the entire world. And He changed the topography, He changed the geography of the land all at once. He changed how, if I understand it correctly, He changed how rain came down and how the earth was watered. He just changed everything at His own initiative, at His own discretion. But then after it's all over, He says this. I'm going to read here in verse, what is that? That's verse 21. I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. In other words, God says, hey, there are certain things that I'm just going to make sure they happen, and it doesn't matter what you think, folks. I can make a flood come because of your sin, and I did. But now I'm going to make a promise, says God. I'm not going to do that ever again. And I'm going to make sure that the seasons always happen. That's what He says. Cold and heat, seed time and harvest, summer and winter, day and night, they're always going to happen. In other words, God says, you have limited influence, humans. Even though you're caretakers, your influence is limited. You cannot do everything that you want to do. You cannot do anything that comes to your mind. We cannot fix this world the way that we'd like to. And we cannot break the world the way that sometimes we're afraid to. Why? Because God says, I won't let you. I will retain control. Again, it's just going back to the analogy of my house. When my kids were little, they had responsibilities. They had to clean their room. They had to clean the bathroom. We made our kids clean the bathrooms. And if you don't clean the bathroom, that can be... There are consequences to that. It starts to smell bad, and the towels start to stink, and the toilet starts to smell, and it's unsanitary, and all mold starts to grow, and you know what an unclean bathroom is like. And if it goes on and on and on, it becomes grosser and grosser, and it definitely affects the whole environment of the house. But it doesn't destroy the house. The house doesn't burn down. So my kids had the responsibility to clean the bathroom. If they did, it was good. If they didn't, the house endured. And I made sure that didn't go too far, that the mold and the grunge didn't sneak out into the hallway. I made sure that the house wasn't ruined, whether they did what they were supposed to do or not. Does that make sense? God watches over this earth, this environment. And while we have responsibilities in it, our influence is limited because he still owns it. Our influence is real. We have an impact on what happens, and we know that, good or bad. But it's limited because God retains control. Here's the last truth that I think is important for us to understand, and that's that the world is broken and fading. And it's important for us to understand that, because if we don't believe that, we will sometimes not understand why certain things happen. In Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, this is again early on, when all of this is being put into motion. And this is after sin entered the world. God created this perfect environment where it was probably like it is today. If you get a chance to go outside today, it is a beautiful day out there. And I suspect that in the beginning when God created it, this is the kind of day he had in mind. And it was like this all the time, and things grew, and there was no sickness, and it was really this perfect environment that we would love to live in now. But then sin entered the world, and God cursed it. God cursed the world because of our sin. Here in verse 17, and to Adam God said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat your bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return." This world we live in is broken. It's broken. It's not the way God intended it. Again, God cursed it. It is a discipline because of our sin. And it's broken and it's fading. It won't endure. It's not going to last forever. It's slowly fading away. And it makes a difference. If that's true, it helps us to understand some things that happen, and it helps us to have a good perspective about what we should expect going forward. Sometimes I think we think if we just figure out how to recycle this certain thing, or if we just figure out how to not use fossil fuels, or if we just there's something out there that we can figure it out, and we will create this utopia where sickness will fade away and people will live for twice as long as we've lived, or we can somehow make this perfect. No, we can't. No, we can't, because it's broken and it's fading. God can make it perfect, and someday he will. He's going to make a brand new one. But this one, the environment we live in, the earth we live in, it's not going to be that. This one's broken and it's fading. So, what's our response to this? The world tells us that we're no more than another animal, or that we reign supreme over the earth. Neither one of those is true. The truth is that we're caretakers. God has given us a special position in this environment, in this world, but he hasn't given us complete control. It remains under God's control. So our influence, it's real, but it's limited, and it's limited in a broken and fading world. So, what is our response? How do we respond to this well? Well, I would suggest three things. And, when we talk about the environment, we live at a time where people don't interact with the environment as much as they did a couple of generations ago. We as a society have moved away from the land pretty much. There was a time when most people were interacting with the environment on a regular daily basis, either as farmers, or they were out in the woods, or they were hunting or fishing, or somehow there was a very, very real connection to the earth. That's not the case so much anymore. We like to go walking in the woods, we like to see it and all that stuff, but it's less of a hands-on thing. Nor are most of us big decision makers. Most of us are not, influencers making big policy decisions about the environment. So it can seem sometimes like, well, gosh, I have no impact on the environment. Oh, I can't influence this at all. I don't think that that's true. I do think that we can respond in a couple of different ways. Here's one of them. We can look at the earth with awe and thankfulness. When you interact, when you go outside, you can be filled with awe and thanksgiving. I would encourage you, your assignment this week, I gave you one last week, your assignment this week is to read Psalm 104. Because it is filled with these, like I said earlier, the guy that wrote it, he's looking at the world around him, and it is filling him with awe. He's saying, holy smoke, I see this, and it's amazing. And I'm so thankful, God, because I see this. You're causing the rain to come down and the crops to grow, and it fills my heart with thanks. We can do that. We can do that, and we should. I can't. Every time it rains, pretty much every time it rains, I remember, God, this is so good. Hearing the rain come down, watching it come down, that's soothing. Even a storm can be exhilarating, but when the rain comes down, it reminds me of God's power and His goodness, because that rain comes down and it falls on the ground, and so the grass grows and the crops grow. And those trees suck up that moisture, and then they grow, and the leaves are producing oxygen for us to breathe, and the plants for us and the animals to eat. The rain falls in the rivers, and the rivers, it fills the streams and the lakes and the oceans. Every time it rains, I'm amazed and I'm thankful. You go outside today, and you see the leaves beginning to change color. And you see the late summer, early fall flowers blooming. And you feel the sun. It's going to be in the 80s, I think, today, here in the middle of September. There's an old poem that I had to memorize as a kid, and we made our kids memorize it too, about September. And I couldn't quote it all right now, but the very end of it is, by all these lovely tokens, September days are here, with summer's best of weather and autumn's best of cheer. It's really true. September's an amazing month. Go outside today. Go outside and soak it in and be filled with awe. Look around. Look at what you see around you, at the wonder of it. And know that God created it. And a lot of it God created, I think, for a specific purpose, some just to fill us with wonder. Be filled with awe and thanks when you see the world around you. That's one way we can respond. Here's a second one. We need to utilize the earth with respect and wisdom. We do use this earth. We do. We eat the produce of the land. We eat meat, the animals. We harvest and we survive because of the environment that we live in. We can utilize this earth wisely and respectfully. It is not good to, this may seem like a little thing, but it's when you're cleaning out your garage, and you've got all of those buckets of strange chemicals and paint thinners, and they're all, just a little bit at the bottom, and they're kind of getting thick, and they're not good anymore. It would just be so nice to walk out back and to just pour it on the ground and then throw the buckets away. That's not wise, and it's not respectful, I don't think, because that's going to get down into the water, and if we drink it, that's not good. Some animal may come and chew on that, and that's not good. It's harder, but put it in a box and take it to the clean sweep thing when it comes. That's a little thing, but it's a way that we can be wise and respectful. This verse in Proverbs 12, Proverbs 12:10. This is a verse I think of a lot because I've always had animals, and I have grown up and continue to live around animals. And this is what it says here in Proverbs 12:10. It says, "Whoever is righteous has regard for the life of his beast, but the mercy of the wicked is cruel." In the NIV, it says, "The wise man cares for the needs of his animal. The righteous man cares for the needs of his animal." It's interesting. God equates righteousness with caring for the environment, the things around us, the needs of our animals, the needs of the world that we live in. That's a righteous thing. And so we can do it respectfully and wisely. What does that look like for you? Well, it's different for all of us. We all interact a little bit differently. But I would encourage you to think about that. I really, truly would encourage you to think about that. How can I do utilize the world. I absolutely do. So how can I do it wisely and respectfully? Look at the earth with awe and thanksgiving. Utilize the earth with respect and wisdom. And the third thing is work the earth with faithfulness and diligence. Work the earth with faithfulness and diligence. We all do have part of the earth. Not all, many of us, most of us perhaps, have part of the earth that is still our little domain, our little dominion. I got 2.5 acres out there in northwest of Eau Claire, and it's my little dominion. So I'm going to work it. I'm going to work it, and I'm going to work it with faithfulness and with diligence. Now, what that looks like for each of us is different, but it's good for us to remember that that's still true. And I'm in Proverbs 12 still. The next verse, verse 11, says, "Whoever works his land will have abundant bread, but whoever chases fantasies lacks judgment." Work your land, whatever it is. Maybe it's small. Maybe it's a flower pot in the windowsill. Maybe it's how you purchase your groceries. I don't know what it is. But remember that we are caretakers. All of us still are. It may seem small, but it's what God has given us. It's the role that God has given us in this great world around us. Okay? So, be filled with awe and thanksgiving. Go outside today. Read Psalm 104 as you're walking around. I think it'll stir your heart. Utilize the earth with respect and wisdom. Remember that what you do, it has an influence. It's real. Our influence, it's limited, but it's real. So I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to work it faithfully and diligently. God's given us an amazing place to live. He's made us caretakers of it. It's not ours to do with what we want. Our influence is limited, but it's real. So let's do it well. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this an amazing world that you've given us. I thank you, God, that you have given us so much, but I'm so grateful that you haven't just abandoned it and walked away, but you still manage it. You still are king. You've given us responsibility. Help us, God, to know what you're asking us to do when it comes to the environment, the plants, the trees, the air, the water, the animals. Help us to do it, but to do it recognizing who we are. We're yours. And you have put us here as caretakers. We don't own it. We serve you. And yet this is our dominion. Help us to see where we fit in this, because I think if we understand where we fit, it will help us to know what to do. So we ask you to help us, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, folks. Next week, hopefully we'll be back together. Justin and I switched. He was supposed to do social justice today. He's going to do that next week. We'll see you then.